Peter Kenn, actually, I guess as we were just talking, Dr. Peter Kenn now. So congratulations on that. And I read through your dissertation. I'm not gonna lie to you and told you that I read all 100 and some pages, but I definitely read through it. And I think the main takeaways are very important. And we'll come back to that here later on when
Sure.
we get to that segment of kind of what I want to talk about. But I appreciate you being on here. And obviously, it sounds
Yeah.
like just kind of what I the research that I've done, and then the conversation we had off the air there. Like you're definitely making a name for yourself, which I think is could be a challenge for. And for
Oh
those
yeah.
people that don't know, you're Joe Kenn, Big House Power. You're his son, and I'll let you kind of roll from there in terms of just kind of your I have like what your title and role and responsibilities are, and then
Hmm.
the next question is going to be like your career progression. So really, however you want to approach it, you can kind of start with
Sure.
what your title is now and work backwards, or you can start with kind of how your life and trajectory has led you to where you are now. So take it away.
Yeah, I've gone into depth on this on a few other podcasts before, so I'll try and keep it as short as possible. But essentially, at 17, 18, making college decisions, decided I wanted to be strength and conditioning coach, and so I wound up going to Appalachian State, which to me is one of the best strength and conditioning programs in the country. With who my mentors were there, from Travis Triplett and a few others, but just a great program overall. Was able to interned there a couple of times, and then I also interned at Wake Forest when I was there, and then I came and worked in Allen, Texas, about 40 minutes north of where I'm at now in the summers, and worked for a company called Performance Course. So I did a bunch of different things while I was in that undergrad, my first master's program, and then when I transferred to Iowa State to continue my student athlete career, interned there as well, and then from that point went straight to Army West Point. Was there for a year, fortunate enough to kind of climb the proverbial ladder at Army fairly quickly due to some big changes within that department for people leaving and a few other things. So fortunate enough to be put in a situation where people trusted and believed in my expertise at that time with not a lot of grounds to stand on, did what I was supposed to do. And then, like any job, really, it's a combination of luck, skill, and being at the right time and right place. And that's how I got to SMU. And when I got here, it was a one-person department for the most part, and was running 9 teams with the help of a full-time, part-time paid kind of secondary underneath me, which was a really awesome struggle. It doesn't feel awesome in the moment, but it was great experience for me to really start something on my own, truly from the ground up in terms of where we were from resources and all those pieces. And now we're a staff that's going to be 4 deep. Basketballs have 2 people and our football's fully 5. So we've made a lot of growth here in our time. Obviously our transition to the ACC helps, but it's been an amazing transition for us, and grateful to have great colleagues on all assets, from dietitians to athletic trainers to our administration. So been very fortunate, lucky, and also feel like I've put in time and effort to grow something here that wasn't necessarily an easy task.
Yeah, not so. I was going to ask, and I'm going to come back to that question about asking about kind of just a little bit about, I guess, making your own name for yourself. But
Sure.
before I do that, and I did hear you mention that on another podcast about knowing you wanted to be a strength coach at 17, 18 years old. What was it about? I mean, obviously, again, your dad's a strength coach, but do you have
Hmm.
siblings?
I do. I have an older brother. Yeah.
So is he a strength coach?
No.
So what was it about you and about strength and conditioning that you felt like, okay, this is the path that I want to pursue. This is something that like I'm going to, not necessarily follow in your dad's footsteps, but do something that he's done and try to make my own name for
Sure.
myself. Like, what was that decision like for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think for most people, it comes with training and falling in love with something over time. It certainly wasn't something that I loved from the beginning. I probably started training legitimately in the 8th, 9th grade when I started doing track and field. And at about 16 is when I started to really fall in love with the idea of training and my own personal growth and a couple other aspects from that point of view of how most strength coaches are in it. And I think obviously the proximity to what that job was at the time with where my dad was at. And I saw a lot of the benefits that come with this profession, as well as a lot of the detriments that come with the profession, and thought to myself and where I was and my trajectory was, this was a no-brainer for me. Obviously, I was going to have a built-in network to some regard, right? Like I was going to have a step up compared to a lot of the competition. It doesn't mean it didn't come with hard work like everybody else. But yeah, my trajectory was going to be different. It was both a strategic play and also a love of the profession in general that really led me to this route. So it was a full encompassing thing. I think the proximity where my training was at the time and fall in love with it, and then my opportunity to compete in college at Appalachian State also helped in that aid in that decision, right? Like of, hey, I love this is what I want to do, but is it really the decision you want to make at 18? Appalachian State was one of the only places that was going to let me compete, and just so happened they had a great program. So it all kind of really worked out in the end of who I was, where I was growing up in, the environment I was in, and then my own personal, training journey in track and soccer that led me to this route.
Yeah, and I want to kind of have you elaborate. So obviously, you mentioned like you probably started off with a little bit more of a network than most people, but I've also heard you
Mm-hmm.
say on the podcast that you also feel like you haven't really had like a set mentor because
Sure.
you have had different opportunities where you've been somewhere for a year and you've been you mentioned even at App State you had, I've heard you say you had 5 different strength coaches in the time that you were there,
Sure.
so you didn't really have somebody like outside of just your dad to lean on. So what do you feel like has been some struggles? Like again, everybody's gonna think like that you haven't had struggles, but
Sure.
and I would say that even at times like I would consider, okay, well it's probably been a way easier path, but you still had to put in the work and you still had to
Yeah.
like get better as a coach and you still had to like gain people's trust. Like people wouldn't just keep giving you the job if you sucked at it, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Somebody
I
might
mean,
give you they might give you that first opportunity just because of who you are, but after that they're not going to just keep giving you opportunities. So how has kind of that been in terms of like maybe unforeseen or unexpected adversity that other people, outside people, like might look at and be like, oh, it's not fair, but in reality, like you still had to like
yeah. I
make a
mean,
name.
I challenge that perspective just because it's hard to make that assumption off of kind of just knowing the outside story, right? Like I think obviously where my leg came up in was I had built-in connections, but not built-in connections to job. I had the opportunity to talk to people that most people wouldn't be able to talk to, and gain advice from. But yeah, I've said this a number of times. I didn't have any mentors because a lot of people thought I knew everything. Where I was fortunate is understanding how the game was supposed to be played before everyone else. So that was interning from the time I was a freshman and getting those out of the way by the time most people are starting in probably their senior year. I had 4 or 5 internships by the time that was over, and even worked for a private company training student athletes 700 a day. So I was fortunate enough to know what the game was. And that's really where the leg up came from. It wasn't from, my dad never told anyone, as far as I've been made aware, that this is your guy, right? Like I had to go out and we purposely made it so that I never traded off his name. I was on interviews where people straight up asked me, are you Joe Kenn's son? Yes. How come he wasn't on your resume? Well, I mean, I don't know if anyone wants to put their dad on their resume, right? Like it just wasn't something that we were going to do. And that was a conversation that he had with me before I even went to Appalachian State, was like, you got to do this on your own. I can't help you or else no one will ever really take you seriously. And so that was a big conversation for us early. But when we get to the no mentors part, right? Like I go intern at Wake Forest, I intern at App, I intern at Iowa State, Carolina Panthers, all those places. And even when I was at the Carolina Panthers with my dad, he wasn't the internship coordinator at the time. It was someone else, and they obviously had something to prove. And I'm sure he had a conversation with them of like, hey, you better put him through the ringer just like everyone else. Like this is not how we're going to operate. And yeah, when people expect you to know everything because of who your dad is, you better make sure you know everything. Me and him very rarely talked about strength and conditioning at all for my entire academic career outside of this last portion of my doctorate when I've been a professional, and we have conversations back and forth, no different than anyone else would have a conversation with either their mentor or a colleague. Obviously, I have access to his brain, which I think is one of the brightest brains in strength and conditioning history. And I try to say that as unbiased as possible, knowing what he's done, what he's been able to accomplish, and listening to him speak on he's just one of the best periodizers I've ever seen across all my research. So it's been obviously a tremendous resource when I've needed it, but I've got the personality where I wanted to prove everyone wrong and I didn't want his help. So I didn't ask for help often. And when people expect you to know everything, you just start reading books. And so that's really how it started. I've been always pretty done well at school, and my ability to retain information is fairly high. So as soon as that first internship started, it was read as many books as you can and show up like you actually know everything, because that's what they expect anyways. So it was kind of I don't want to say a self-made process. There's been tons of people that have helped me, but self-made education for sure in terms of what we've been able to accomplish on my end, and couldn't do that without my fiance and obviously my parents from other support outside of the strength and conditioning world. But it's been, yeah, it's definitely not the road that I think people expected it to be. I think a lot of people think that there's handouts when it comes to that. And I can say I've never experienced something that I knew was a handout. Again, I don't know any other backdoor deals. I don't think there was any because I've asked that conversation with him before. But in my world, in my perception, there was no time when someone handed me something. I mean, I had applied to probably 70 jobs, 8 months without my first strength and conditioning job before I got a job. So, and I know that's a lot of people's experience, but if my experience was like that, I would imagine that's somewhat similar to most first time graduates looking for it. So how can you say I had a handout when everyone knew who I was and still didn't want to take the bet? And that's why I give a lot of credit to Army. They called me and we had some really in-depth interview questions at the time when Scott Swanson was leading that role and now Kenn is. And so I give them a lot of credit in taking a bet on someone who probably wasn't ultimately the most qualified person, but I like to think I did well on their interview or else I wouldn't have been there. And then they let me really take the reins of everything as soon as I got there. So yeah, I give them a lot of credit for making that gamble.
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. And like I said, I that's the answer that I just from listening to some of the stuff that you've been on and put out, like that's the answer I expected. But I definitely feel like it's something that people assume that it was easy, even though you probably the biggest thing you said is you knew that you just need to start getting experience. And that's something that I want to kind of I was gonna hold some of these questions for later in terms about like young coach development and things like that. But in terms of like if you had a young coach in front of you, like somebody that was 18 years old and and especially knowing now that you're, and we can kind of come back to your dissertation as well, but your dissertation was essentially like looking at an overview of what do strength and conditioning internships look like and what kind of experiences, educational side of things, hands-on experience, like what kind of things do they provide. And you can probably obviously give a better summary of that than I can, but like based off what you've learned personally, based off what you've learned by, which by the way, I should have said this from the beginning. That's how you and I got connected because you reached out to
Right.
a bunch of strength coaches, and I was happened to be one of those that I like. I like filling out surveys, and I like doing it. I like doing helping with research and doing interviews. So, but yeah, like I guess let me before I finish that thought, let me let you give your background on what your dissertation was and why you thought it was relevant,
Sure.
and what some of those takeaways were, and then I'll follow up with essentially like what would be actionable steps that you learned from that, I guess. So start with
Sure.
just like
Yeah.
an overview of your dissertation.
Yeah, it was I'll kind of give you the quick backstory. At first, I wanted to really look at what the intent of internships was. Right? Like the US would describe an internship or how it's defined as like a learning opportunity. But I think obviously in our field that's the case and not the case, right? You can't get a full-time job unless you've had some type of experience, and we know that that experience comes in the form of internships most typically. And so I wanted to know what the intent of internship directors was or internship coordinators in what their actual goal was, right? Like I did multiple internships, but really when you think about it, that doesn't happen a lot in any other profession. So I was trying to figure out, what are we really trying to do? Are we just trying to educate people? Are we trying to get people jobs? What is it? And why are we subject to multiple internships before we can get our first full-time job, regardless of what that may look like? And so that's how it started. And then as we started to look into the research, it became really clear that you can't answer that question without first understanding what the structure and content of an internship actually is, right? You can't know what the expected outcome is without knowing the details of what's actually happening. And so we transitioned and we switched to more of the idea of what is the structure, content, and rationale behind that structure and content. And that came with interviewing strength coaches all over the country from Division III, Division II, and Division I, and trying to get a really good understanding of what those programs are doing, on top of understanding the differences in potentially resource management between those different levels, right? Like a Division III internship is typically different than a Division I internship in the sense that you get significantly more hands-on experience at those levels because they do not have the staff or resources to adequately fund a full staff member, department member who can handle teams. So interns actually at Division III and Division II are probably getting significantly more hands-on experience, which I think is really important in that learning process. Whereas Division I institutions are giving you more of a progressive build on your internship experience. And it starts with shadowing, and then it starts with leading a warm-up, and then it starts with leading a training group. And then maybe you get to, handle an entire group of freshmen on your own, but it's also paired really heavily with academic texts and all those pieces, where at the Division III and Division II level, they just don't have the time to do that often. And I think it is a major resource implication in that, hey, we got one full-time member here, we got 7 interns, and I got 20 teams. Someone's running teams, right? Like whether I'm there supervising or not, someone's going to do it. And we'll do as much academic as we can, but with my schedule, again, 20 teams, we're probably not running through academic unless you want to ask questions and we can go through it. So there's a lot of different plug and play there. Ultimately, what it comes down to me is interns have to have just as much, not say in the internship curriculum, but they have to have just as much investment in it as the internship coordinator or director. And that makes it really hard because some interns are trying to figure out if it is what they want to do. And other interns are like, this is what I'm going to do no matter what. And that's hard in an internship coordinator setting, because it's like, okay, well, we're trying to figure out if this person wants to do it. We have to integrate them into the system. Whereas someone who wants to do it straight off the bat, you can go all in with and not push them to the point of they don't want to come back. And so structuring content is different everywhere, but ultimately what it comes down to is you have to have hands-on experience and you have to understand the rationale behind it, which is part of the title of the dissertation, but it's the truth. If you're just getting hands-on experience and learning how to describe movements to athletes, but not understanding the why behind that description or how something's supposed to feel. An example of this may be on a front squat. An intern might say, hey, you need to keep driving your elbows up out of the bottom. Okay, well, if there is an inhibition of the lats flexibility to raise the elbows up, it's never going to happen. And so they may be able to describe a movement, but if they don't understand why something's happening, then it becomes a detriment. And so how do you create an internship that has both of those things is fairly difficult. And on top of that, I think internships and what interns should look for in an internship setting is to have opportunities to program for student athletes. This is a really hard thing to do. Obviously, there's liability that comes into question from an athletic department, even at the high school setting. But if you're first time programming or putting your own ideas on paper and training someone as in your full-time role, I don't know if that's necessarily the safest option for our student athletes. I think there are creative ways that you can put interns in unique opportunities to put their own thoughts, theories, periodization, whatever it is, into a student athlete setting, especially during voluntary time for teams in the off season. Summer is a great time for us where, we'll ask interns to, hey, go write something on the board. We'll review it for safety. But even if it's different from what I would normally do, as long as it's safe, and an athlete chooses to do that in their own voluntary time, and I'm there and supervising as the CSCS certified person, there's nothing wrong with that to me. And it gives that person an opportunity to really see what's happening. And then we ask the athlete to give them feedback of like, hey, we did 5 sets of squats and then we did 5 sets of rear foot elevated afterwards with a calf raise. Probably shouldn't pair those things back to back. The next day they come in, hey, I'm super sore. If this was in season, it probably wouldn't work. And so that at least gives an intern an opportunity to put their own thoughts, theories, and ideas behind something and then actually learn from it, as opposed to, well, Coach Kenn does the tier system, so when I go get my first job, I'm going to do the tier system. Well, if you don't know anything about it or really what the basic concepts of that are and how to employ your own rationale on top of it, then it was a waste of your time. And so a lot of it comes down to that. And I think interns have to do probably a better job of finding coaches that understand that, and coaches need to do a better job of advertising what it actually is. It shouldn't just be a cleanup deal. I clean up every day. Our interns are going to clean, but we're also going to make sure we educate you to the best of our ability and create that understanding of why, as opposed to just, hey, let's describe something.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's great. And you kind of already answered the second half of what I was going to ask in terms of like, if you were going to give advice to a young coach, number one, what would you tell them to look for in an internship / in a mentor? So I guess let me stop there. So answer that. Like, what would you tell a young coach? Like, I have so many questions because again, I have a lot of interns, and that's something that I'm at the Division II level. Like, my job is, as much as I love the athletic development side, like I'm also like a coach developer. Like I have to be, because if I wasn't developing coaches, then our system wouldn't work because I'm the only full-time coach. So it's something where like it's something I take as much pride in that as I do athlete development. So I'm very interested to kind of hear what your thoughts are and what advice you would give a young coach, especially maybe a 17 or 18-year-old who wants to be a strength coach. Because again, another flaw in the system is typically you don't get told to start doing an internship until the last semester of your senior year of college, which at that point in
Sure.
time, it's either you've either started to get experience too late or you found out that you don't like this profession too late, right? Which
Right.
neither one of those are good outcomes for that situation potentially. So, what would you give an 18 to 19 or a freshman or sophomore in college? What advice would you give them to kind of put them in position to be successful?
Yeah, you have to get exposure. Right? I don't think that answer is fully unique in terms of what most people would say, but that exposure goes in a lot of different directions. Not only exposure to academic content that you may not find in your own academic course work within an institution or on the academic side of the house, but exposure to every different type of training system, modality, whatever you want to call it, is incredibly important. We try to do this here where we expose our interns to all the different models that we're privy to, whether it's conjugate style training or West Side or tier system or high low models or upper lower splits or whatever it may be. We're going to expose you to everything and allow you to make your own decisions on what you want to implement and what works best for you. But on top of that exposure, not only from a knowledge standpoint and very specifically on what strength conditioning is and periodization and all those other pieces, but also exposure to coaching, right? I think most people would agree that you can't be a coach unless you've coached. And that it sounds funny to say it that way, but you're never going to get a job unless you've had experience actually explaining something to a student athlete. And so, in an internship where you're just cleaning or an internship where you're just shadowing, those experiences are never going to put you in a successful position because you're never going to get to experiment with your own ideas. You're also never going to experiment with your own coaching voice. And one of the findings from my research was when people look at the outcomes for interns, a lot of them weren't necessarily related to, well, we want this intern to get a GA or we want this intern to get a full-time job. They all pretty much said, we want interns to learn how to command the room. And so part of that comes with exposure. You cannot learn how to command a room or speak to a room or to a group of athletes or to coaches or to admin or athletic trainers or whatever it is, walk in and people know that you are the presence that's leading the group unless you've had exposure and you're open to failure, right? That doesn't work for everyone right away. Personalities sometimes don't always match what you love, but you can learn how to fake it. And if you fake it long enough, it just becomes who you are. But that can't happen if you haven't had the opportunity. So it's really important to get out early. I think interning as early as possible is something that'll always get you a few steps further than most other people in this profession. And it also allows you to engage more on the academic side. If you are in a kinesiology exercise science program in your academic, you're starting to piece these things together way sooner than most people. And then you can start to have conversations with the staff members of who you're interning for that are meaningful in helping develop your actual thought process and how to train student athletes, general population, high schools, geriatric population, whatever it is that you want to do. You can have greater in-depth conversations that allow you to really expand upon your own knowledge base.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. Honestly, hearing you say that, even just me as a mentor, again, I'm so at the end of the day, like my job is on the line. So it's one of those where I probably don't always give, whether it's interns or GAs, I probably don't always give them. Now my GAs are in charge of their own teams, but there's
Sure.
still times where, like when we have football in there, like I probably don't give them enough opportunities to lead warmups and lead certain things. And I think it's just one of the things where we have to be able to put them in very small situations and
Right.
slowly, gradually give them more opportunities, and more responsibility. Um, I never really let you kind of like, yeah, I guess I didn't give you a chance to explain what sports exactly you work with at SMU.
Sure.
But what is your
Yeah.
current responsibilities at SMU?
Yeah, so my current is I work with both our men's and women's soccer team, our men's swim team, and our track team. But I've worked with all of them here from women's swim to dive, equestrian. I've helped with row. I've helped with the golf a number of times. Um, and then our tennis is actually have their own facility with their own coach. So I've worked with everybody that comes through us from all those teams, including cross country and a few others. So I've worked with 9 teams at once, basically covered 11 when I first got here, but directly responsible for 9. And then now I'm in charge of 4, and that'll drop to 3 here, is what it's looking like soon.
Okay. Which one's going to drop off your plate?
Cannot disclose that information quite
Uh,
yet.
I got you. I got you.
Yeah, yeah.
For track and field, are you working with the whole team, sprinters, throwers, jumpers, distance? Like which group are you working
Yeah,
with?
we're a little different here in that we don't have throws as a primary group. I work directly with our jumpers and our sprinters.
Okay.
We separate that from cross country. One of our assistants here works with cross country, and it's just what works best for us based on coaching needs. But yeah, I'll do direct work with our jumpers and sprinters. We're fortunate enough to have two sprinters go to NCs, and one was an All-American, one was an All-American honorable mention. So luckily, we've had some good success there. We've had an ACC champ this year. So for us, it's nice to see that growth from the track side of things. As you know, our transition again from the American to the ACC has just been really, really fast, really furious, and luckily we've been given the opportunities to be successful.
Yeah, no, that's great. When did that happen? How long have you guys since you moved from the AAC to
We
the
just
ACC?
finished year two,
Year two.
so yeah,
Yeah.
2 years ago is when we got in, and it's been off to the races since. We've seen an explosion of resources and an explosion of staff members from all areas of our athletic department, something I give
Yeah.
a lot of kudos to our administration from.
Yeah, it's something that again you see teams doing that and then they like make the jump. You'll see like D2 teams make the jump to D1 and then they don't really increase budgets or funding or anything
Sure.
like that. And you'll
Yeah.
see, power four teams jump to, or group of four teams jump to power four and they don't make the changes necessary. But it's good that you guys are doing that. We'll come back. I want to definitely ask some questions on specifically soccer and even track and field as well. But you mentioned the tier system earlier. Obviously, again, your dad was the inventor of that.
Sure.
What is your personal take on the tier system? And then I'm probably gonna have a follow up in terms of how you kind of give us like an example of that. But what is your personal like overview and interpretation of the pros, the cons, essentially your entire kind of philosophy utilizing the tier
Sure.
system?
To me, the tier system is simply a management system. It doesn't necessarily tell you what to program, how to program it, what your sets and reps should be, what your volume should be. It's just essentially here's the movement types that should go in a specific group around an athletic based training model. And for me, the way that works out is essentially becomes a concurrent model, and how I program and what my periodization is. So some of the arguments against it could be from, maybe potentially traditional block style training methods or periodization methods where you're focusing on one adaptation at a time is not something that I'm particularly keen on. I've done it before. It's just not what I think works best for the particular group that I work with. So to me, the way that I've implemented is concurrent model that has a lot of flexibility that covers the entire athletic based training while not having the opportunity to miss certain days, right? Like I think one of the major pros is if you are running a lower upper split or an upper lower split and you miss a day, you've missed a complete day of training on an entire half of the body. Whereas in this particular model, right, if I miss my second training day of the week, which is typically a lower body emphasis, on that next day where we're upper total lower, I can switch my primary emphasis from day 2 to my tier 3 and day 3. And so it makes it really easy and flexible for me to plug and play if we were to miss days. Luckily, we don't miss a lot of days in across our groups. But yeah, there's a lot of play and flexibility in that. We'll change days around on occasion. Like our in-season model is a little different where I take the lower day and I actually put it at the beginning of our week. So if it's traditional, right, total lower upper split and it rotates like that on a 3-day train, we'll do is actually go lower upper total on day 1 and then our total day comes to day 2, especially in season if we may have the opportunity to not train on day 3. And I like that because it takes the highest fatigue, at least to me, the highest muscularly fatiguing movements that we're going to do that week, pushes them to the beginning of the week and allows for a little bit more recovery by the time we get to competition. And then my second day, which starts with my total, may actually have a decrease in its total intensity, but still have really high intent on total power. If I was using a clean or a dumbbell jump or whatever it is that I decide to program in that first primary emphasis, it now becomes more of a primer for the competition. Whereas in the off season, we'll leave it in a traditional model.
When you're thinking like that is more so helping you with program design, how does that influence then like again, I'm a big fan of concurrent model as well. I think that's kind of, especially with like team sport athletes and how chaotic and dynamic the schedule and things are. And again, they need all qualities at all time throughout the year.
Sure.
How do you look at that from like a implement that in with like a bigger picture periodization model? Because like, again, essentially the way that I interpreted what you just said there is that's more of like, here's my week to week kind of, here's what
Sure.
we're going to squat on Mondays and we're going to do a power clean on Wednesdays as kind of our main, like our tier 1 exercise. How does that look in terms of like across the semester? Is like, are you going to
Yeah.
go heavy back squats earlier in the semester or more volume? heavier squats in the middle, and then like speed, like chain squats or band squats later in the semester. Like, I guess let's maybe, I think I maybe easy, make this easier on you. So if we pick like soccer, for example,
Mm-hmm.
twice a week, they're going to probably train. I'm assuming in the fall, 3 days a week in the spring. What does that entire fall semester look like in terms of day one, day two
Sure.
versus month one, month two, month three, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I'll just kind of run through what our women's soccer team has done here traditionally. So we typically start our voluntary training sometime early in July. Um, we're changing schedules this year due to some NCAA changes in when coaches can become more involved. So I'll go off of last year. But essentially, we would have 3 to 4 weeks of voluntary training. And so where I typically would implement is I'm still looking at mesocycles in particular groups of adaptations that I'm trying to make. It may fluctuate on the microcycle in terms of what my emphasis is in a primary, secondary, tertiary fashion throughout the day of training. But like I'm still probably going very full range of motion, super, super non-technical movements for the most part early on in our year, right? So if we had a month to train before we get into our preseason, a lot of that whole month is going to be general strength and power. And then as we get into season, we'll see essentially our microcycle change again from 3 days of training to 2 days of training. And those 2 days will essentially become a very interesting microdosy type of deal where we always train match day -2. So if we have a Thursday, Sunday game, we'll train Tuesday and we'll train Friday. Our Tuesday, we're going to microdose and we're actually going to pull 2 of our microcycle days together. We'll pull day 1 and day 2 of a traditional tier together and have a primary emphasis in the total and the lower. And we're still trying to maximize as much as we can. Intensity will shoot up, volume will decrease just to hopefully minimize some muscle damage and some neural fatigue as we roll into the season, especially as we get deeper. But then our second lift becomes more of an auxiliary day where I try to hit all of our big pieces on Tuesday. Our Friday lift is coming off of a game typically. And so we're going to hit all of our auxiliary from knee structure and health to ankle structure and health to low back, maybe some shoulder. But ultimately it becomes almost a high-low model where our second training day is super, super low, especially for our starters that are playing 60 plus minutes, or their total load is super high, or we have different ranges for our starters, our rotations, and our players that don't get often super heavy minute loads. But that's what our in-season really looks like. It's 2 days, high-low type of model. And that focus for us does become pretty specific to competition, right? So we go from general strength and power to specific power almost only. The strength is going to come through different pieces. But again, the way that I've cycled it is I almost turned block periodization into my different tiers. And so my first tier may be a strength oriented movement, or it may be a power oriented movement. And so I will maximize the adaptation for that particular grouping or that particular tier of movements. And then the next tier may include, again, maximal strength or maximal power, depending on where we're at and what movement size is selected. So I turn the tier system into somewhat of a block hybrid in which it's a microcycle block. And that will often carry through the primary emphases. So if I want my primary emphasis to be max power, I will incorporate that across all 3 days of my primary emphasis so that we're still getting max power efforts across all 3 phases of what we consider athletic development, from total, lower, and upper. But the entire mesocycle may have a designation of what we're trying to do. I'm not a huge fan of maintenance in season, so we do try and push really hard on that first day. And luckily, we've been doing that for 4 years to the point where our athletes are pretty comfortable knowing what that feels like going into a Thursday game. I'm not saying we don't make adjustments if that Thursday competition is a little bit harder. We will often make adjustments for tougher games, obviously being in the hardest conference in the country for women's soccer. But then we get to December, we do our our winter packets and all those pieces that are all pretty generic, and they kind of go back to a lot of compound movements, a lot of full range of motion, volume increases, intensity will decrease, and we'll kind of get into a hybrid hypertrophy strength type-ish deal. But as soon as we hit the spring, we're back to 3 days a week full time with me, and that will transition from general to very specific again, because we have a spring season that happens with about 5 games. And so I don't do a lot of different transitional types. I don't believe in like preseason it's just like we're either in the off season or we're in the in season. If we're in the off season, we're going to train super, super hard. If we're in the in season, we're going to adjust and train in more of what I consider a new model or a new era model where we will look at sports science and all those pieces in the off season. I'm not utilizing it in that same fashion. We're utilizing it in a performance base, but we're going to go maximal tolerable load in the off season, minimum effective dose in the in season, and our mesocycles are structured around important games.
Yeah, no, I mean that makes sense exactly. I mean, I think that's I don't know. I sometimes I think it should be as easy as what you made it sound. Like I don't know where sometimes like the confusion comes. Like I think that's exactly
Sure.
how the in season and how the off season should kind of look. Um,
Well, I'll give you another example actually. So I agree with everything you just said. When I go look at swim, things change. We will go to very specific sports mechanics movements in season, right? Like whereas soccer to me entails a lot more athletic ability than swimming necessarily does, just
right.
in the competition and in the practice. So I'm not overly concerned with creating overly athletic movements in the weight room because I think they're getting addressed on the pitch. Whereas our swim may need more athletic movements because a lot of them have been swimming since the time they were 6 and not been exposed to a lot of other sports. So we'll work through significantly different planes of motion with them, but we'll also go highly, highly specific, similar to a track, because there is somewhat of a direct correlation, especially for sprint swimmers, of the ability to produce power and your time in the water. And so we'll do split stance variations all year. We'll add chains towards the end of our taper period in our in season going into conference championships because I like the accommodated resistance in that fashion. I think that's what happens when they do a flip turn off the wall. So we'll get a little bit more in the weeds with sports that I think have very particular needs and niches when it comes to the transfer of the weight room to the particular aspect of what their competition is. Whereas more quote unquote athletic based sports, typically I don't need to incorporate that as much because they are getting so much lateral change of direction and single leg work and plyometric work on the pitch and field that it's not something that isn't a priority for us. We still incorporate it, but it just changes. And so I don't want everyone to think that every sport's the same. It's not. We do employ a lot of the same principles, at least how I program across my teams, to go from non-specific to specific, but in different fashions. But yeah, we just we do a traditional model in the off season, train them hard. You're supposed to be sore. I don't care if your velocity isn't where it's supposed to be. Like we're just going to hit certain percentages where we need to. We'll use some velocity to help track some of those things. But ultimately, I don't care if the RPE feels like a 10. Yeah, sometimes it's going to feel like a 10. Well, in a game, it's going to feel like a 10 too. And I need you to know what that feels like. Whereas in the in season, we'll be a little bit more careful in fatigue monitoring and making sure we're tracking GPS and knowing where our practice loads are compared to our weight room loads, or our starters versus our non-starters and all those pieces. So we try to incorporate everything in different fashions.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. And I definitely want to come back to track and field here in a second, but so obviously as a director on the Olympic side, I mean, you're essentially, even though you may not be directly responsible for those 9-ish teams, like you're still kind of overseeing that the other coaches are doing kind of their part to make sure that those teams are successful. Do you guys have a like department wide, at least from the Olympic side, do you guys have like a department wide kind of like philosophy, standards, like standard operating procedures? I know I definitely heard you say on another podcast you were on where number one, just make sure everybody's kind of speaking the same language. Like if you're going to call it a Bulgarian squat, but somebody else is going to call it a rear foot elevated split squat, just making sure that you guys are on the same page with that, stuff like that. But even like bigger than that, even more of a broader approach, is there things that when you guys sit down and have a staff meeting, you're like, hey, like this as a group, this needs to be our overarching philosophy, our overarching standards? Like what are those things? Like how do you make that work?
We went and had a group discussion of where we really, there's a traditional model, an old school model, if you will, of directors saying, this is what we're going to do. And that's it. Right. And then as Olympic sports began to develop and the staff started to increase, and it wasn't just the head football strength coach saying, here are the other teams as assigned. And we really started, it became completely different, where essentially a lot of times directors really switch from like hey, here's what I'm doing, this is what everyone's going to do, this is our base of our standards, what are our mesocycles look like, what are our percentage jump looks like, and all those pieces. And it just became everyone was doing whatever they wanted. We have tried to meet somewhere in the middle in terms of, hey, what are our big pillars that we want to stand on as a group, while still allowing for the, I call it academic freedom of the individual to program what they feel is necessary. me and Ryan Evans, one of our assistants here, we have these conversations all the time. The way he does things is significantly different than me, in the sense that if he's going to focus on a particular adaptation, he's going to focus on that adaptation. Whereas again, I'm more of a concurrent model, and I'm happy with having some diminishing returns on a particular adaptation if I feel like all things are moving forward together. But we do have some pieces that we try to adhere to. It's not necessarily a strict standard where if this doesn't happen, someone's getting in trouble, but we have some baseline roles of like, what does our typical mesocycles look like? Whether it's what I would say is a base, a load, a superload, and a deload model, right? On a traditional 4-week meso where you're 3 up, 1 down, or is it a base load, deload, superload model? We'll talk about what those look like in season versus out of season. And then we'll also have general percentage-based jumps that we like to see week to week. It typically ranges between 2 to 6%, depending on how someone wants to program, but we like to see those jumps happen. For me personally, where I employ things is like I'm a 3 up, 1 down in the off season, and I'm a 2 up, 1 down, 1 high in the in season, because I think it allows the athletes to get 2 deloads almost after they come back into week 5, and how that progresses throughout long strings of mesocycles. But then I'll do 6% jumps in the off, or I'll do 5 or 6% jumps in the off season, 2.5% jump, 3% jumps in the in season week to week. A lot of our staff does that as well. But those are kind of our overarching pillars. What do we want everything to be called? Did we built out an entire movement database based on how we define total, how we define lower, how we define upper, all the different modalities that we had in the room. So we were speaking the same language as you mentioned earlier, but then we also talked about these big umbrella items in terms of how a program is going to look. And if you want to employ an upper lower split, go for it. If you want to employ a block periodization model, go for it. If you want to employ tier system, have at it. It's less of how are we going to restrict coaches that we feel we've done a great job of recruiting and bringing on based on their knowledge, and aligning our department so that if anyone comes and asks us, we can have a great answer to what they're trying to say. And so a lot of it comes down to the templates, how we're making decisions to increase intensity or increase volume in certain situations around that. But it's not a my way or the highway model, and it's not an a la carte model where anyone gets to do whatever they want. We really tried to create a system that we can all agree upon as like, I may have said something in that conversation of, I think we should do this, and the other two outvoted me, and I was going to allow that to happen because it wasn't a hill I was willing to die on. But then we came to a set standard of like, what are our weekly jumps? How are we progressing athletes if we're not going to test? And if we are going to test, what does that look like? How are we going to do sports science from warm up to what is our actual, like, how many jumps are they doing? All those different pieces, mesocycle development, movement development, all those pieces, and what our typical trajectory looks like, right? Like if we're doing a body weight split squat, how does that transition to a weighted split squat, to a rear foot elevated split squat, to a front foot elevated, to a barbell split squat? Like, what does our progressions really look like, and trying to make sure that we align on how we think we should develop athletes. But it was a shared ownership of ideas that we try to come together and say, this is who we want to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's all great. And I'm definitely a big believer in, like, Ryan, there's a guy here in town that runs a private gym, and I've been affiliated with that gym, whether working there as a coach or I actually run the internship program there as well. And he always talks about having a unified but not a uniform approach. And I think that's probably the best way to kind of approach that. And I think it's very, very good to hear that that's what you guys are doing. What when you think of, like, especially when thinking of like the tier system, when you think of like a total body exercise, is that pretty much always Olympic lifts? Like what kind of falls into that?
So and my dad would probably define this differently than I might, but Olympic lifts certainly fall into that. To me, any movement dominated at the hinge, or that you could consider a complex of an Olympic variation, also counts for that. It gets dicey when you get to like single joint exercises. Like an RDL, technically by that definition, falls into a total movement, but I've also used it in a lower block. And it just sort of depends on how I want to play with it, right? Like it's not a super rigid system in how I'm willing to be flexible in certain movements, but a deadlift for me is always going to be considered a total body movement. Not necessarily because the upper body is doing an extreme amount of work, but I do think that there's a lot of upper body control. And I also look at the deadlift as a primary movement competency to the clean. I'd even put sumo deadlift in there, not because there's a direct correlation to Olympic lifts, but that's kind of part of the definition. Any type of throw, any type of plyometric often falls in that as well. from what a total body would be considered. And then again, that definition can change for whoever it is, as long as you have a rationale behind it. But for me, it's Olympic variations, hinge dominated movements that incorporate some type of development to an Olympic movement. Dumbbell jumps, any type of plyometric would fall under that. And then any type of med ball work would be incorporated that as well. And then you could make arguments for probably a few other things. I don't know. I don't even know where you would classify this in the general scheme of things, but like a landmine rotation press or a landmine clean or something like that. While it has clean in the name, we wouldn't consider that an Olympic lifting variation, but that's a total body movement. So there's plugs and plays in that. And again, sometimes the lower body pieces can be a little different. Like I consider a traditional deadlift a total, but I don't know if I'm considering a trap bar deadlift a total every time. I might consider that a lower just because of the particular joint angles in that and how much easier it is in comparison to not have to worry about the upper body for most athletes that we're really focusing on whether high handle. Like if we're high handle, it's a fairly short range of motion that's dominating the quads and glutes for the most part outside of the eccentric component of that movement. So it's like, is it a hinge? Yes. Is it a little different? Also, yes. But I could put it either way depending on how I'm feeling that day.
Yeah, right. First of all, I love that the lights keep going off and you have to slowly slide back in
I'm
your chair
sliding back
to get them to turn back on. I that's hilarious.
I can't fix the timer. I don't know where the button is. I've been here for 4 years. I've never figured it out. So sorry.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's I like it. I like how you've just it's become something you've like worked.
Oh
into,
yeah,
like,
you
your
just
system,
push
like you
back.
just sliding back and sliding back forward. So in terms of, and I was going to save this for a question later, and I may end up coming back to this too, but what is something you kind of alluded this a little bit? What is something that, at least from the tier system, like you and your dad would disagree on? Like, is there anything that you guys have debates on in terms of that? The question I was going to ask later on is like, what's the thing that you guys disagree on the most in terms of strength and conditioning? But you can answer that, or you can just answer the tier system itself first.
You know, I've been asked this question before, and I don't really know if there's anything that really dominates our difference in big picture stuff. I can't even think of anything that we've disagreed on right now. I know we have. Like I remember having conversations where I'm like, well, why are we doing it this way and not this way? Or and he's given his rebuttal. But off the top of my head, I can't think of any major pieces where we significantly disagree. And I think obviously that's a large part of I grew up in that system and how I was training in high school because he was writing that, and I try not to argue with the guy who invented it in terms of specific pieces. But I think what makes that system so great is the availability for you to put your own spin on things. And I don't think a lot of people think of it like that. But for me, that's where I've found, like, if we have a conversation now and I tell him we're doing something, he goes, I can see why you're doing that, right? It's never like, well, I wouldn't do it this way, or, you know, vice versa. Like, I've been training that way myself for a long time. I've obviously put my own spin on things on how we do things here, but ultimately I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Right? And maybe he's screaming right now if he's listening, where he's like, yeah, we definitely did. But I can't think of anything personally.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I get that. I mean, I think it's something that, you know, I think, like you said, that is kind of the beauty of the tier system. And I'm by no means an expert, but I've definitely read up on it.
Sure.
As probably as much as the average strength coach has. And I think it's something that, even going back to the concurrent model, I think it's something that we're all kind of already using, even if we don't realize that it's actually, like, you know, even if we're not calling it the tier system, right?
Sure.
And I had Guy Hornsby. I'm not sure if you know who that is. He's a strength and conditioning researcher. He's actually here at West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And he's very much came out of ETSU, Dr. Stone,
Sure.
kind of block periodization. And we had that discussion on a previous episode. And even he said the same thing. He's like, look, like in some form, we're all kind of doing concurrent training. In some form, we're all kind of doing block periodization. Like it's just, how are we describing it to other people?
Right.
You know,
right.
And he actually made a really good point. He's like, if I talk to a strength coach and I ask them about their program, and the first thing they do is start telling me what they don't do, he's like, that's where I start to be like, I don't know if, you know, how this guy really, because like, I agree with that. Like, I'd rather tell you the things that I think we do well, not the things that we don't do. Oh, like, we don't do this. Oh, we don't do Olympic lifting. Oh, we don't do like block periodization. It's like, no, let's just, like, which is what you're doing. That was just me kind of like
Sure.
thinking out loud. One thing I did want to ask you though, and maybe you will have an answer for this. And I don't know if anybody's asked you this question or not, because you mentioned a hill that you're willing to die on. Like, what conversations, whether just you yourself, like having internal
Sure.
conversations, or you and your staff, what hills have you been willing to die on? Like what
Yeah, I
what
mean,
exercise selection, what program things, what culture things? Because I'm gonna have a culture question next too. But what
I
hills have you
think
been?
the big one that I'm willing to die on is maximum effort intent power based movements at the end of training sessions. Again, depending on your thought process of like when something should happen, most people would say power based movements require the most technical acumen and should be done at the beginning of a lift because that's when you're under the least amount of fatigue and the technique should hold up as much. I'm not saying I'm doing heavy cleans at the end of a training session, but I would not be opposed to doing light snatch work at the end of a training session or massive dumbbell jumps or how any type of plyometric you can think of at the end of a training session, because I do have a lot of belief in that if we're going to have athletes go compete and have to give maximal intent in a power or ballistic like style movement in a game, they should be at least aware of what that means in a structured setting and in a controlled setting where we can say you are not pushing as hard as you can based on numbers or just based on the eye test of like you're jumping at 80%. I need 100%. Coach, I'm tired. You're going to be tired in a game or in the pool or on the track or whatever it is. We need you to have a maximal intent under fatigue, even with technical aspects, because that's what's going to occur on the field. And I'm not like if it's going to happen on the field, you have to do it in the weight room. Like that's not what I'm willing to die on, because I think there's two ways you can go about it. You can either do that or like what's everything that they're not doing on the field. That's what we need to focus on. I think both of those can go really, really well hand in hand. And I don't think it has to be one way or the other, but I will die on like regardless of how you're looking at it from an energy systems demand. Truth be told, at the end of an hour lift, everyone's in an aerobic metabolic capacity at some point. Like you just can't train for an hour and not be using an oxidative system. I don't know how that works. I'm not saying that there aren't other variations, but to me that doesn't make sense. And so if that's the case, I'm going to make sure that you have to show that intent, not under the most environmentally make sense conditions of minimal fatigue coming off of an off day. Like we're going to hammer power based movements at the end of training sessions and at the end of the week under the most amount of fatigue possible, knowing that, yeah, we may be exposing you to potential soft tissue injuries, but we're not programming you at, hey, 10 reps of Vertimax. Like we're not going to go crazy in terms of volume. We still try and play things smart, but I'm going to ask you to go full speed.
So are you in that sense? Because I've heard that before, and I think that's interesting. I've heard it from other people. I think it's an interesting approach because it's definitely something that I don't do. I'm very much like stick to like the NSCA textbook of like
Sure.
you always want to do your highest demanding, most technical things first, and kind of work down to your accessory work. But I do understand the logic there. So take me through like. Can you give me an example and maybe like whether it's soccer or swim or track, like give me an example of like, okay, so at the beginning of their lift, let's say especially like it's, that kind of that lower, upper total day. So would you like you wouldn't do like you do their warm up and then you go straight to back squats, straight to bench press, and then you finish with like loaded jumps? Like you wouldn't do a power
Yeah,
exercise early in
I've
the
done
lift
that before.
and
Yeah.
then
I
finish
mean,
with a
again, my question would be if I'm doing a heavy loaded back squat, what more do I actually need to do to activate the motor units within that muscle belt? I understand it's not the same intent, but hopefully if the percentage is high enough, we've already activated a significant amount of the motor unit recruitment early on. And by going to upper, I'm actually allowing those particular, at least in how I understand it, those particular areas to somewhat recover. Obviously, the substrates are different from how the blood, it's the entire body, but the muscles themselves will have an opportunity to at least recover slightly in whatever those sets and reps are for the upper body before we then go attack the total. And it's not a traditional cool down because the heart rate should still be up. And yeah, that total body on that day isn't probably going to be a clean, but it could certainly be an alternating split stance dumbbell jump or an alternating split stance banded jump or something like that, where we have constant movement and repeated effort, high intensity jumps with a single leg dominance that's requiring some heavy technical aspect because we're flipping the legs between each rep and in a repeated fashion, right? Like that's a high level movement. Obviously, the jumps are going to decrease throughout each individual set as fatigue continues to set in. But if we're asking for the highest intent and increasing some of the technical output there, there's no reason that that movement can't be put into that. But I would consider those fairly high demand concentric and eccentric outputs, especially if we're talking about a banded movement or a weighted jump. If we were talking about a box jump or a straight leg box jump, right? And I define it, a straight leg box jump as landing with minimal knee flexion, but we do want some bend in the knee. But if I had someone going on an 18-inch straight leg box jump, I may pair that with a med ball slam at maximal intent to have some of the eccentric component happen in the lowering of that med ball. And we teach a really heavy leg dominance on med ball slam. So I would have potentially a concentric only type jump paired with an eccentric ballistic style power based movement or a slam. So I'm kind of working both, and I understand all that's happening at the same time, but that's something that we've done before. We've done the split stance alternating before after a heavy leg day. And again, that volume is all dependent on what happened in the rest of the training session. We're not doing 5 sets of 10 in that particular area of the tier.
Yeah, no, I definitely see your point. I mean, it's definitely something that even just play around with, and I think that's something that, thinking outside the box and being a critical thinker and doing things differently. I think that's something that we always need to be doing, and it's kind of cool to hear your thought process on that.
Well, I'll give you another piece of that I just thought of, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no, it's fine.
If I'm doing an alternating split stance jump, not as technical as potentially an Olympic lift, but if we're doing it under fatigue and an athlete traditionally doesn't have knee cave, but now at this particular part of the training session, they are having knee cave because fatigue is setting in. Now I've found a new area that this athlete needs to work on under fatigue, because surely it's going to be exposed in fatigue in a game-like setting. And so I actually think beyond just my belief of if we're going to do maximal intent in a game under fatigue, we need to do it in the weight room under fatigue. That is true to me, but also it exposes an athlete from a technical sense that now I have new things that I can fix and help them progress on, that hopefully we will do in that same time frame of you're under heavy load of fatigue. We know that we see some knee cave. Let's do some type of glute work under this fatigue as well to hopefully counteract some of that.
No, that it definitely makes sense. And I think it's something where there's an argument to be made just in the simple fact of the mental side of it, just
Sure.
doing something different, doing something that, again, our kids pretty much know exactly what they're going to get into when they walk into the weight room this fall. They know they're going to warm up, then they're going to go straight to some sort of power or Olympic lifting, plyometric, some sort of exercise along that line. It would be just interesting just to think about it differently. I think it's one of those where some teams, like you said, it might actually be a positive thing, because it kind of, instead of them finishing with the easiest, boring, slow stuff, now they're going to finish with something that's further going to potentially prime the nervous system.
Yeah, so, I mean, you could turn that into anything. You could turn it into competitions for your team. Again, all of the things that I say, one, I believe in, and I would take them with me to other places if the environment and I know we'll get into this, the cultures allow for that. All of it is so specific on who you're working with. We're fortunate enough to have great head coaches that recruit great talents that are easy to work with. I've changed things for athletes that have come in that aren't overly athletic. It's all environment dependent. It's all context dependent on who you are, what you have to work with, what your room looks like, and all those pieces. But that is those are some of my major beliefs. So I want to make sure that I understand that's not the same for everyone.
Right. Before I ask you about culture, is there anything else in terms of exercise selection or things that you feel like you have to do, in terms of hills that you'd be willing to die on?
Not necessarily hills, but I'll give you some examples of how my mind traditionally operates. If I'm doing an explosive movement that is a concentric dominant, I'm going to have some type of explosive movement that's an eccentric dominant. In my lower body stuff, if it's not a compound squat or a belt squat or a pitch shark or a leg press or something that's compound like that, we will typically pair quad dominant movements with hamstring dominant movements. We will hit hamstring about the knee at some point in the week, and we'll hit hamstring about the hip at some point throughout the week. But a traditional day for me could look like a clean on tier 1 on day 1, and then we're doing a rear foot elevated split squat and a single leg hamstring. I love pairing single legs with single. Basically, everything I do is antagonistic and agonistic work in supersets throughout the tiers. If we're doing upper body, it's a vertical with a vertical and some type of shoulder variation that will alternate. I'm going to hit anterior, medial, and posterior delt throughout the entire week. And then I'm always going to have some incorporation in my tier 4, which I call my auxiliary tier, of some type of prehab movement that can be individual specific or sport specific, and some type of trunk or root training to continue to reinforce the core stability. Again, under fatigue, I think is super important. So I try to be as simple as possible, and I hope that what I've talked about and the tangents I've gone on hasn't thrown that off too much, but like it's about as simple as it can get. The exercise selection may become more complex over time, from like a split stance, front rack, chained pin squat, right? Well, I've done that before, and I do that pretty regularly in our in season for our swimmers, because the split stance position, I like the accommodating resistance because I think it's similar to resistance from the water, and it's in a minimal range of motion because they're not going to be in deep range of motion in competition. And it's the most least fatiguing thing I can do while still getting leg work. Like, we're going to do really complex things, but the overall thought process is trying to make things as simple and smart as we can, that we think creates the most amount of adaptation and concurrent fashion that our athletes can handle on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think, then again, at the end of the day, this even goes back to what we were talking about with the interns. Like, you give an intern their first opportunity to write a training program. Like, if they just throw stuff on the wall and you're like, well, why'd you pick this? And they have no answer, like, then that's not an acceptable thing. If they throw something
Sure.
up there and you're like, why'd you write this? And they give you a great answer, even if you might disagree with it, they give you a great answer, a logical answer, a critically thought out answer, then that's fine. Like, that's a good exercise.
Right.
So it's one of those where, like, I don't really think that, as long as a coach can describe it, and probably what's more importantly is, it's one thing for you to describe that front rack accommodating resisted split squat. It's another thing that you are able to get your athletes to buy into it and give you
Mm-hmm.
great effort. And if you can do those two things, it really doesn't matter what the hell
Sure.
exercise you're picking anyways. Um, in terms of culture, because like obviously you work with like and I don't want to say like weird in like a negative say, but kind of like a weird mix of teams where like everybody thinks of culture as like football, basketball.
Sure.
I think our women's soccer team we only have women's soccer, but our women's soccer team at Fairmont has a really good culture in terms of the girls wanting to show up and train and get better and compete. Whereas like you're probably at soccer practice more often than you probably like hop in and watch swim and dive practice, I'm assuming.
Sure.
And probably even more than what you maybe even go to track and field practice. So
Sure.
in terms of like you personally, your beliefs on the strength coach's role in developing or with upholding a team's culture. Kind of what's your personal beliefs, and then how have you been able to navigate that with the three or four teams that you work with?
I think it's really dependent on the head coach. If a head coach has a really endearing and strong personality, that they're yellers and they can bolster up a lot, I don't know if I need to do that twice. And so the way that I operate in culture, everyone will define it differently, and I'm not going to attempt to make a shot at the definition there. But ultimately, it's a shared ownership of ideas and beliefs towards a common goal, is how I kind of view it. Is like, we're all here to work for something, and part of that is through a set of standards that typically, in my world and how I operate, is not up to me. It is up to our head coach, right? We have some head coaches that don't care if the team wears the same shirt in the weight room, and we have other coaches that'll be like, hey, kick them out if they're not wearing the same shirt. And so a lot of the culture for me in my world and how I've decided to operate is dictated by our head coaches. If you're going to be a rah coach out in the field, I'm going to probably be a little bit more of the practical educational coach on the back end to continue to share why what we're doing is what we're supposed to be doing. Whereas if you have a super highly technical, very large educational component coach out on the competition surface, and they need someone to be that rah person, I will do that as well. And so it comes down to what the coaches need. And if they don't want me to be the opposite and they want me to reinforce, we'll reinforce. But a lot of those team standards and ideas and where we want to be is determined by our head coaching staff. And ultimately, I think it should be. But my big thing for us in our weight room and how I ask myself and our staff to operate is to be transparent with our student athletes, to educate our student athletes as much as we can on why we're doing things and how certain things are going to have an impact on them, and allow them to give feedback without getting upset with it, right? Like, we operate, and I said this earlier in a different conversation, but it's not my way or the highway. Our goal is to win games or to win competitions. If an athlete comes to me and says, this movement doesn't work for me, I want to do this instead, I may disagree. We may have a conversation about it. I may try and convince them, but at the end of the day, if they're telling me this movement makes them feel better in a game, and I think that we can manipulate it to get a similar adaptation that I want out of it, we're going to do it. And so our culture is really built around trust. And I don't love the term family in college athletics. I just don't necessarily know if I really believe that we're a family, considering people can be fired at any point. Like, I just don't know if that's the right word. I typically use the word community. We are all a part of this particular community on this campus with one common goal. We have a set amount of standards values and expectations from our administration, our direct supervisors, whatever it may be, but we're all hands on deck to make our community better. We're not necessarily a family. People leave and enter communities all the time, and communities grow, and sometimes they get smaller, but that's how we typically operate, is just like, let's be transparent with everything that we're trying to do, make sure that our athletes understand we're here not for the self-recognition, and we get things when they win, right? Like, we may get more money when they win, we may get more recognition when they win, and at least being transparent about that is like, hey, I'm not here to make you the strongest person in the room. I'm here to help you win as many competitions as possible. Is often pretty refreshing for student athletes, especially we have a lot of transfers that come from other strength and conditioning departments where I don't pretend to know what they do, but I think that is a common, like, let's be the strongest, fastest people in the room. Well, if that doesn't help them or make them feel like we're adding to their win column, then they may not buy into it as much. Whereas if I tell you, hey, every decision I make is going to be based off of helping you win games, not only because I want to see you be incredibly successful, right? I don't think anyone's a strength coach because they're not a servant in some regard, but also selfishly, when you win, I look better. So it's a twofold thing. Even if you thought I was in it for my own gain is making you better. And if you really believe that I'm here to help you, which I am, then that also works on that front of just being transparent about, hey, here's what we're doing, here's where we're trying to go. And so creating open lines of communication from them to feel free to give us that feedback is super important. But I know that doesn't really tailor or knock down the question of like our culture and how we do things, but essentially our culture is to be of service to our head coaches in a manner that works well with our student athletes to ensure that we're all continuing to march to the same common goal.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's great. I think that's very well said. I mean, honestly, you're a very well-spoken person anyways. So I'm not surprised, but my one pushback there is, and
Sure.
I'm in a unique situation being at the Division II level because I technically don't report to any coaches. Like, even though I'm
Sure.
oversee all the teams, it's kind of like the blessing and the curse. The blessing is like, I don't really like I don't go to like football meetings. I don't go to basketball meetings. Like, I'm in the weight room so much that I don't go to that stuff. The curse is sometimes I also don't really know what exactly is going on and what the team vibes
Sure.
always are. So it's almost like we kind of have our weight room culture. And my hope at our level is that our weight room culture kind of like transcends out into the teams.
Sure.
And the teams that it does kind of seem to do that with, kind of like there's like, I'm not bragging. It's just the teams that seem to work the hardest in the weight room and value the weight room also have the best culture because of who their sport coach is, but also because it like mixes well with the weight room culture.
Sure.
And they're also the teams that end up to an extent having the most success. So I think it just happens to kind of work out really well like that. But one thing that I hear all the time, and I agree with the logic to an extent, is especially at the Division I level, you'll hear coaches say, and this isn't like a D2 versus D1 thing. This is just, a controversial thing that I personally think. You'll hear a sport coach or strength coaches say, I work for the sport coach. Like, if it's going to help us win football games, like, and the football coach wants to do it, I'm going to do that. I'm going to concede my beliefs and I'm going to do that. I push back on that a lot because in my opinion, like that we are the experts in our field, quote unquote, right? That would be the same as us saying, hey, we're going to go to football practice and tell the football coach, hey, I don't think, or go to a football game and be like, hey, I don't think you should be, running so much, whatever, like inside zone. I think you should run a lot more like pass heavy, like no, like that, what I'm saying? Like, we wouldn't do that. So I get a little bit like, I don't know what the word is, like not frustrated, but, and again, I don't have a lot of these issues happen at Fairmont, to be honest with you. Our coaches are pretty bought into what we do and they pretty much stay in their lane and I stay in my lane for the most part. But it's a weird thing for me where like we say that we work for the coach. My approach always is like when we hire a new coach at Fairmont, I always tell them the first time I meet with them is, luckily I don't work for you, but what I do work for is the athletes that you're coaching. Right.
Sure.
And I make that, and I try to, my argument is I try to put the athletes at the forefront of what we're doing, not the exercises, not the wins and losses even, but like, here's what I think is best for the athletes. Like, so what, I mean, again,
Yeah, no, I know exactly where you're going.
This is the first time I've really brought it up.
I appreciate the pushback. Yeah, no, I appreciate the pushback. Here's what I would say. I agree with you in that I work for the athletes. The truth is, though, at the end of the day, I work for our AD. Well, the AD signs my checks. Exactly. Right. Like if one of our coaches that I work with gets fired, I'm not losing my job. That's different in football.
Right.
You do work for the sport coach in high level programs where when they get let go, they're bringing in an entire staff. So the question becomes, how bad do you want to keep your job over willing to die on a hill? And in the super high level, high resources, that's what it comes down to. Now, for me, it's a little different, right? Like I said, I'll match a coach and I'll work for him. I work for the coach in the sense that, yes, I agree with you. We work for the athletes. That's my number one priority. But at the end of the day, head coaches get me more pay. And if 4 head coaches don't like me, I'm losing my job. So in some ways, I do work for them, just not on paper, is how I would argue. Now, I agree in general. I don't know if it's a great move to be aligned with a head coach, depending on the particular sport you're in. But that's also why we got football strength coaches making $1 million, because they can get fired tomorrow if a head coach turns over. Whereas for us, I would say an average power four director is probably over 100, somewhere in the 100 to 150 range on average is what I get. That's a big range, but you're making a great, comfortable living without being directly tied to a coach who their success ultimately determines if you have a job or not. I realize that there are some situations like that, but I would say on average, it's probably not like that. At the end of the day, though, if the head coaches don't like me and they go tell our admin, there's a greater than not chance that will come back to bite me, rather than if I make my head coaches happy and try to work with them to the best of my ability. And again, I realize that's a different conversation than I work for you or not work for you, but I think they're really tightly related. And so, yeah, I'm a servant. I work for our student athletes, but I also work for our coaches because they help dictate when I get salary bumps or when I don't. That's just how I try to be as honest about it as possible.
No, I mean, I get that. And I can appreciate it. And again, I think it is one of those where I'm in a, I guess, fortunate, I would say, that we do the word situation, because I do work for our AD and he has a lot of trust in me, and he's actually leaving, and we're promoting another AD who I think also has equal amounts of trust in me. But I'll give you an example. Our previous basketball coach, he's gone now, but we had a situation where we had 2 or 3 guys, and this will tie into an injury question, and then we'll have to do probably a couple rapid fire ones here before we wrap up. But we had a couple of situations where 3 of our basketball players within like the course of 2 weeks had like low back strains.
Mm-hmm.
None of them occurred in the weight room. One of them, the guy was taking a 7-foot guy was taking his shirt off in the locker room and tweaked his low back. Right. Only one of these strains. Sorry, I guess 2 of these strains led to one guy each missing 1 game. So out of our entire basketball season, we lost 2 like starts. Like we had one player with 1 injury each missed 1 game each. So 2 total games lost this year, which in the course of a basketball season, like that's something like we had like a 98% availability rate. That's pretty damn good. Anyway, he came to me and he's like, "Hey, are we deadlifting the guys?" I was like, "Yeah, coach." And this is like November. This is like very first 2 or 3 weeks of the season. I was like, "Yeah, coach, we are." He's like, and again, we're doing, when I say deadlift, we're going either trap bar deadlift, high handle, or we're going elevated sumo deadlift. So that like 7-foot guy, he's going off 3 DC blocks, right? So it's almost like a rack pull, right? Anyway, and that's like our main kind of lower body tier, total body exercise, right? So he comes to me, he's mad about these deadlifts, and I'm like, "Coach," I'm like, "It didn't happen the day of, it didn't happen the day after, it happened 3-4 days after they last deadlifted." I was like, "I don't think it's the deadlifts." And that's one of those where like that was kind of a hill that I was almost willing to die on. Because of the fact that like I genuinely didn't believe that was the issue. So we had this, me and the training staff and the coach, we kind of had this debate, and I told him, I was like, "Look, for these 2 or 3 guys, like they don't have to deadlift. Like deadlifts aren't the hill I'm willing to die on, but lifting heavy was the hill that I was willing to die on. Like we're still trying to get better. As you said, we're 2 weeks into the season. We're not starting to get weaker at this point. We want to still keep getting stronger." So the reason, and that's where this kind of mentality that I said, like, this is where this first kind of came out of my mind. I'm like, wait a second, coach, like I'm not doing anything for you. I'm doing stuff to get these guys in position to play. And if I didn't think that a deadlift was the best thing for them at that point in time, which it may or may not have been, if I didn't think lifting heavy was the best thing for them on that specific day, we wouldn't be doing it. Like we don't lift extremely heavy. So that was where this argument kind of like where this whole thought process came from. And I kind of had to obviously do a lot of like introspective thinking of like, was that the right approach? Did I say the right thing? And now that we've hired 2 new coaches, I've had that same conversation with them, and they've kind of like agreed with me on there. Like, yeah, like we are going to trust you that like whatever your opinion is on what's happening in the weight room, like we're going to trust you on that. And what my approach would be is, you tell me what you want, like what do you value in the weight room? And those are the things that I will take my opinions, my approach, and I will try to match that with what you want to see come out of the weight room. If you want all of your guys to be 10 pounds bigger, stronger, faster, we're going to have to lift heavy. We're going to have to sprint, right? If you don't want your guys to be fast, okay, then we might not have to sprint, even though I don't think that's the best approach. Like, and again, I don't think any coach out there would say they don't want their kids to be fast, but you get what I'm saying. Like, that's where, I'm not just pulling this out of left field to just be like a contrarian.
No, I think actually the more I've listened to you, I think our argument is 2 sides of the side coin, just in a different way of explaining things in terms of what we're trying to do. Like I view it as when I go talk to a head coach, the number one thing I tell them at any job I've ever started is the same thing that I try to allude to with our student athletes. And it's not me trying to be selfish. It's just me trying to be honest. When you win, I get paid more. That's a fact in my life. It's not the same for everybody, but that's a fact in my life. I get more money. Why would I make any decision to hinder your ability to win? And when you have those conversations very upfront, it helps open up the dialogue of like, okay, well, why were you actually doing this? There's got to be a reason. Like, you just told me you're not trying to do anything to not help us win. And I think that way of communicating it, while may not be the most professional way to do it, at least a head coach gets that of like, oh yeah, this guy's making, or this woman's making decisions to directly impact their own self-interest on top of other things, right? Like, and so part of that isn't just like, hey, we're going to lift heavy because I want you guys to be the strongest people on the field. We're going to lift heavy because I think it's going to keep you healthier long term, or whatever your argument is.
Right.
You have to phrase that differently. And again, it's all context dependent. And other places, if in a situation like where you're in, where there is no tie to the head coach, you can have a different opportunity to explain your reasoning and voicing a little different. Whereas, I'm not tied to a single head coach, but I want head coaches to think that and believe that, because now they're going to trust me more the more we continue to push.
No, I definitely think I think I completely agree with you. And I think it's something that I may have a slightly different approach if I was tied to one or two specific teams. Like, there may be some things that I would have to be a little bit more willing to
and I hate that we even have to say it, but like, obviously everyone's in it for the student athletes.
Right.
I feel like we got to keep saying it. Like, that should be a blanket statement for anyone in this field. Right. And it's like, yeah, obviously we want them to be successful. We want them to win. No one's doing this if you're not getting joy out of a senior coming up to you and saying, hey, thanks for the last 4 years. You have no idea how much. We're all doing it for that. So I've tried to not say it a bunch of times, but I'm just going to blanket statement so there's no misconception later. Like, you've said it, I've said it. That goes without saying. The rest of how you try to attack this, it has to be selfish.
Right.
We're trying to make livings. We got families to feed, and it's a selfless job, but I mean, no one else is out here not saying, hey, anytime we see a job on whatever job board it is that's paying 24 to 32 grand, we all know that's wrong. So we have to be selfish a little bit more. And that's a totally different topic, but that's part of why I communicate the way I do with our staff.
I would say I actually have that in one of the kind of the rapid fire questions, but just to kind of finish with that thought a little bit, like, and kind of go into the injury side of things. So, and this can even be considered a rapid fire question. So obviously, I think a lot of times, at least historically, our job has been looked at like injury prevention. And again, I just, this could be kind of a scapegoat answer, but I just don't believe in that, because one thing that I've noticed is since I've been at Fairmont for 5 years now, our athletes have become just better, because they went from having very minimal training either prior to the time that I got to Fairmont or just prior to them being at Fairmont themselves, to where what our kids are capable of doing now, the sprint velocities that they're hitting, the vertical jumps that they're hitting, the squat and deadlift and bench numbers that they're hitting, it's exponentially better than what it was when I first started. And again, that's more a testament to the kids that our coaches are recruiting, and the buy-in that they're giving and the trust that they have in us. Because we're all doing the same stuff. We're all power cleaning. Like, me and the school down the road are all power cleaning. It's just our kids maybe believe and try a little bit harder than their kids do. But what I've noticed is, as our focus on my focus on performance has gone up, there is almost an equal incidence of what I would consider catastrophic injuries. Like, soft tissue injuries are down, like hamstring injuries, ankle sprains, like those things are down. Overuse injuries are down. But what I would say catastrophic injuries, ACLs, Achilles, those type of things are maybe not even higher. They just seem more relevant, because I feel like we're having less total injuries, but we're having equal, if not more, big, explosive, ACL, MCL, Achilles ruptures, things like that. What's your take on, and I'm going to quote Buddy Morris here, because I think it's relevant. I've said this on the podcast before. Like, if you don't want to get hurt, don't play sports. Like, and I think it's something that
it's fair, right? Like, I don't believe in injury prevention. I believe in injury protection. I'm going to do everything I can to bolster specific areas of a student athlete to aid against injury, but I've seen just too many crazy things happen. I've worked with wrestling when we have guys in a single leg getting their knee twisted, and then we go, well, why'd he pop his LCL? Is it because of the weight room? It's like, no, did you just watch the last match? Like, sports are going to create opportunity for injury to arise. It's our job to protect against that injury as much as we can. We're never going to prevent it. There are weird things that happen, but if we know in soccer players the knee is a particular trigger area, we should do everything we can to protect the knee through whatever modalities that is, whether it's we need to increase hypertrophy or the muscle structure around the knee or the tendons and ligaments and their structure related to the muscle around the knee. Like, whatever you got to do, you got to do. But at the end of the day, there's too much variation. I would argue also probably as competition continues to increase with a great performance in athletic training staff, you probably will see tic-tac injuries go down from minute muscle strains or whatever it may be. And you probably will see more of the catastrophic stuff happen because we're asking athletes to perform at a higher level than we've ever asked them to perform. On top of that, you can look at injuries from any 1,000 different avenues of what happened. Was the turf too wet? Are we on actual grass or turf? What time of day was it? When we're talking about female athletes, is the menstrual cycle something that we need to think about when we're incorporating into their hormonal levels and laxicity in the joint? Like, there's 1,000 different ways you could look at it, from performance to the athletic training room to whatever. But really, I'll kind of give an example of, like, I think a year ago we had some type of internal audit, and our insurance claims since I had been here for all the teams I had worked with was down like 50%. And I'm like, yo, I'm doing a great job. What it really comes down to is, yes, I am a small part of that puzzle, but our athletic trainers have been doing a better job. Our insurance claims have been doing a better job. Our insurance manager, we were recruiting better athletes. We were putting more time and resources into our facilities that was allowing them to train the way that they need. Like, there's so many different avenues that add to or detract from insurance claims, high rate of injury, or major catastrophic injury. Like you said, you may have no hamstring pulls, but we had 2 ACLs and we didn't have any last year. Some of it's unfortunate, the luck of the draw of sport. I try not to get too deep in I will evaluate every injury the same. I'm going to treat them all like I had a hand in it. And I will communicate with the head coach, hey, we had this ACL injury. I'm going through and looking at our program, how is different. We're going to look at some of the numbers. We're going to track how our other teams felt. We're going to talk to the athlete, the athletic training staff, to see how things changed throughout the year. If there was any indication, what was practice looking like leading up to that? Like, we'll do all the steps and make sure. But we try and do a strong interior audit of, like, is there something that we could have done different? And we've come to the conclusion a handful of times of, like, yeah, we may have been able to do something different. It's hindsight, right? Like, practice was 1,000 yards over than it was the previous week, but it's not necessarily a number that they haven't hit before. Maybe we shouldn't have done. Like, you can go back and forth on those all the time. I think it's most important for you to have conversations with the entire, what we call human performance, but your entire sports performance staff, from the athletic trainers to the coaches, to the strength conditioning coach, to your rehab specialist, to dietitian, whatever it is, or whatever resources you have at your institution. Whoever's a part of making those decisions needs to have those conversations in a true, like, be it willing to take ownership of saying, hey, I'm going to walk into this room and say, it could be my fault, and I'm going to address a way to do it. And if you do that, a lot of other people are willing to do it too. And you may come to a conclusion that works for everyone, but there's no way to prevent them. You can certainly protect against them, but ultimately it's just, that's the nature of sport.
Yeah. No, and I completely agree with that. I think that's just the hard pill to swallow. Is like, I think everybody kind of already understands that. It's just like, yeah, but when it happens, it's so, like, devastating to everybody involved. It's like, fuck, like,
Well, yeah,
let's
everyone
figure
wants
something
someone to
out. So,
blame, right? I think
yeah.
some of that arises from an older thought process of, like, I think a lot of older generation strength conditioning coaches would be like, well, they're just going to blame us, right? It's
Yeah.
always the strength coach's fault. And that, when you continue to perpetuate that to your staff over years and years and years, and then they move on and they have their own staffs, and that's a mentality that I think we have as a profession that we allowed to continue to happen, as opposed to trying to fix the root issue. Again, something I think we've done really well here is having those conversations honestly with our coaching staffs, in conjunction with a number of other people in a roundtable meeting, of saying, hey, we're willing to look at this and see if it's our fault. If we do not come to that conclusion, you're going to have to trust us that we really don't think it was us. Now, there's always something you can say, hey, we did this, we're going to change it for next year. We don't know if that was the problem, but we're going to look into it and address it. And that often has but the moment that you come into the conversation, well, they're just going to blame me. Well, you're already setting yourself up for, like, a weird, why are you guilty kind of conversation. Now the head coach is going, well, why did you automatically assume I thought it was going to be you? Did you have something to do with it? So I think it's probably a really bad construct that we've created in our own profession because of things that did happen previously, that with the access to resources that so many institutions have, even in the Division II and Division III level now, where there's a massive increase of resources, maybe not as drastic, but we've seen things improve for a lot of those institutions, that you can begin to have the conversation of like, yeah, I'm open to it being my problem, but it may also not be my problem. We have to be willing to accept the idea that, yeah, the foot got stuck in the grass and the knee twisted and something catastrophic happened. There's nothing anyone could have done about it. Now, can we try to do things in the future to make sure that that doesn't happen? And even if an athlete's put in a compromised position, how do we put them in the best situation to make their way out of it? Absolutely. Let's have that conversation. But blame is the wrong way to go, and it just separates staffs, and it has to happen from all avenues.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. All right, we got like a minute or two here. Let's go through some of these.
Sure.
So, and you can still elaborate, but obviously I know you said you got to
I'm probably
take
going to
off.
elaborate.
All right, if you could sit down with any strength coach dead or alive and eat lunch with them and pick their brain, who would it be? That you have, maybe that you haven't already done so with.
Any strength coach dead or alive? Probably Bondarchuk, even though I don't know if you can consider him a true only strength coach only, right? He did so many other things. But I really love a lot of the pieces that we saw from some of that old school training, and a lot of the plyometric type of stuff that was happening in that time frame. I think is super interesting. Obviously, there's a question of how much juice were those particular athletes on, but I think there's a lot of really interesting training modalities that, you know, everyone talks about super training as like the hardest book they've ever read, or and it's just like, but there was obviously something that particular area of the world was really keen on when it comes to training that I still think we're trying to catch up with even today. And a lot of those concepts are things that we don't necessarily understand really well today, but they were incredible athletes that were able of handling those particular loads and that type of training stuff. So probably someone like that.
Yeah, I think that's a solid answer. I mean, this isn't my interview, but it's something that you get me thinking about that. And it's like, yeah, like it'd be great to be able to go back and, you know, just watch a training. Like I've met
Sure.
Louis Simmons. I got to meet Louis Simmons, but I never got to go to Westside and watch him train, like watch a group of his athletes train. Like that's
Right.
something that I feel like, you know, you can watch the YouTube videos of it, but it's just not the same as being there. I would love to be able to go back and watch like a Bondarchuk session, go back and watch a Louis Simmons session at
Sure.
Westside, like when, especially when they were like,
Verkhoshansky. Yeah.
yeah, Burkish, like, yeah, like it's definitely something that, you know, I'd like to be able to be a fly on the wall for like an hour. All right, what would you say right now is your like biggest weakness as a coach?
Interestingly enough, I think it's a big weakness for most coaches. I think I'm really competent in it, but conditioning is something that I will always struggle with, just not being a conditioning athlete and not understanding the feeling of what that is. I think I'm really great at power-based movements and strength-based movements because I was a thrower in college. And so there's so much transfer to that and how we were actually training the weight room and what we were trying to do out of practice. Whereas the conditioning aspect is something that I never experienced as a student athlete to that degree that we would be asking a soccer team to do, or even swimmers or whatever that may be. So while I think I'm incredibly competent in programming things, and we've you know, I don't want to sit here and be like, well, we've seen numbers decrease and da, like no one actually cares. I think we've done a great job of conditioning is the point, and I think we've seen success on that end. But it's definitely an area of my expertise that I need to continue to build upon. And I think most coaches would likely say the same thing, especially if they work in strength and power sports for the most part. And that may be surprising given that I work with our men's and women's soccer team and programming those things all the time. But it's certainly the least confident part of my arsenal. While I'm still confident, it's like there's always room to improve and learn new things.
Yeah. Do you run the conditioning sessions for soccer? Or does the sport coach still do that a lot?
No, our staff does. We actually implemented a sports scientist for both of our programs. They have their own that help with those pieces. But I've been a large part in the summer training for those. And early on in those first 2 years before we had those positions, I was running the conditioning sessions full out. We'll do a number of different things from conditioning based cutting sessions to long form sessions to all the other fartleks, whatever you want to call. But we try to match the demands of the sport as much as we can. So a lot of that running will be intermittent in stages and times and distances that we think align best with the sport. Is typically how I've tried to do things, create as similar to an environment of the game as possible without actually playing a game, has been super successful for us. But also, we base a lot of pieces off of our conditioning tests for those two sports. Those are kind of the only field teams that I work with. So we do a 30-15 conditioning test, which is an intermittent conditioning test. And so we try to prep them for that test in alignment with game that we think has the best transfer in terms of what we're asking them to do. So we'll do interval sessions of, hey, we're going to run for this amount of time. We're going to walk for this amount of time. We're going to jog for this amount of time. And it's just a continual cycle. We've also done, 25 yards out, 25 yards back, switch the cut leg. Your rest is your partner gets to go, which we think has a lot of play into how soccer is typically played, or at least how our team traditionally plays it. A little bit slower pace. There's going to be some big runs that require sprinting, but there's going to be a lot of time where it's a moderate to low level jog or even a walk. So we tried to match what our sport coach's tactical and technical aspect is on the pitch, and also what the game demands are. If we're pushing to get to 7 miles for a 90-minute player as a starter on the men's team, we're probably going to get pretty close to that over the course of 2 or 3 days conditioning sessions in different fashions to match that game load.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I think it's cool. Like I said, our we just got a new soccer coach, and he's definitely putting a lot more logical thought into the conditioning approach than what our previous coach did. But what's your favorite lift, and what's your favorite training music? Artist, genre, song?
I usually listen to country, sad country. There's nothing that'll get you right. Like a little sad country will get you.
Like who? Give me an example. Like Zach Top?
Like Pecos and the Rooftops.
Okay. Yep.
Will get you feeling pretty down. That's good stuff right there. You got to feel sad before you hit a squat. I feel like it just fires.
I love it. Like I can listen to like Cody Jinks and be like,
yeah. So big country guy in general, but I'll also, like today we listened to CKY, System of Down, a couple things like that. So some, I don't even know not hard rock, but like rock. I don't know.
Yeah.
Some punk rock type ish vibes. I don't know, like that early Bam Margera him era from the TV show, that stuff. We'll listen to that in here. But not really rap, because that's what all of our teams listen to for 9 hours a day. I don't want to listen to it when I train. What was another question?
What's your favorite lift? Yeah. Right now, at least right now.
Probably front squat, to be honest with you. I could have gone with a different one. Like we just started doing lateral landmine squats, which I'm really enjoying those. I like rear foot elevated split squats because they're really hard. And I just, more of a lower body guy.
I got you. And then last one, this one's, I just started asking this question 2 podcasts ago. If you could get, as a strength coach, if you could get an NIL deal with a company and they would be like your official sponsor, they'd supply you with free gear, free products, whatever it is, who would that company be and why?
It'd be Takis, the chip company, Fuego, Takis. That's like my kryptonite. I eat Takis all the time, but that's just, they got great colors. Be cool. No one else will ever pick that. So I like to be unique in that. But yeah, for sure, something like that. If we're talking about like a larger corporation, if NASCAR wants to sponsor me, I'm down for that too. I like racing a lot. So those two I think would be really interesting. And I would not even ask for money. I would just ask for an unlimited lifetime supply of Takis.
Yeah, actually, I don't want to disappoint you, but I don't think I've ever even tried
okay.
the Takis before. But I know what you're talking about. No, that's what, and again, that's one of the things where that's what NIL.
That's just like my thing.
Yeah, but that's like what NILs are looking for. Like they want they want somebody that's
if you're listening,
loves their stuff, and it's like a niche thing.
If they're listening, please, I'm open. I can be bought on that front. I will make a post every day if you want me to.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Coach Kenn, Dr. Coach Kenn, I appreciate your time. This has been a lot of fun, and I think it'd be cool to connect again at some point in the future and do another round of this.
Let's do it.
It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
No, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I hope someone got something out of this. I'm happy to answer any questions. If anyone has any, you can find me on Instagram at PeterKenn1, or my work emails online if you just search for a directory. If there's anything I said today that you're like, what the hell is he talking about, or you want to push back on, or you want to ask more questions about, I'm happy to answer any of those things and be a resource to anyone. Been fortunate enough to have a lot of people help me, so I'd be remiss if I didn't help someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be great. I think people are going to take a lot away from it. So I really appreciate it. It's good chatting with you. Have a good one. Good luck to you guys this year too. Thanks.
Appreciate it.